Folks, you've been putting the wrong sauce on your grill for years, and it's not about taste, it's about what that bottle's been hiding from you the whole time. One of these sauces spent 30 years owned by a company that makes bleach. One's got a whiskey legend splashed across the front and has never once been made anywhere near Tennessee. And one brand stood up, made a public promise to clean up its recipe, quietly broke that promise, and left the proof sitting online right now for anybody willing to look. 7 bottles, all on the same shelf you shop every week. I farmed this land for over 45 years, put up my own preserves, canned more tomatoes than I could count, made my own sauces from scratch in this very kitchen, and I'll tell you the first thing I ever learned about food. If a company doesn't want you flipping the bottle over, that's exactly what you ought to do. So that's what we're doing today. Worst to best, all 7, and I'll tell you exactly what's really in each one, what it does to your food on a hot grate, and what you can do about it if it's already sitting in your fridge right now. Then I'll show you the 5 that earned their spot on your grill honestly, the ones that never needed a corporate accountant to tell them what a real sauce looks like. And the worst bottle on this whole list? It's also the best-selling barbecue sauce in America. That's not an accident. And I'm saving that story for last because once you hear it, you'll understand exactly how a company can build a monopoly on nothing but a memory. Pull up a chair. This is going to take a minute, but it's worth every one of them. Let's start with KC Masterpiece. Because it smells like a real cookout, I'll give it that. But here's what that label's never told you. For 30 years, this sauce belonged to the same company that makes Clorox bleach, Pine Sol, and Glad trash bags. Sit with that a minute. A bleach company owned your barbecue sauce for 3 decades, right there in the corporate filings if you go looking. A child psychiatrist named Richard Davis built the original recipe back in 1977 and won competitions with it, but he's been off that payroll for decades now. His name's still on the bottle, his recipe left when he did. Put it on the grill and that honest first smell burns off fast, leaving a sugary glaze that chars before the meat underneath finishes cooking. Read the panel and you'll find corn sweetener listed twice under 2 different names. An FDA-allowed trick that splits one big sugar load into 2 smaller-looking lines. Caramel colourings in there too, dressing the sauce up to look like it came from a real kitchen. Long-time buyers figured this out years ago and started cutting it themselves with apple cider vinegar just to make it usable. When your own customers are fixing your product for you, that's not a complaint, that's a verdict. Right next to it sits Bullseye Original, the one folks grab by the case at the warehouse store because the name promises precision. Here's what it'll never say on the label. Cross into Canada and this exact sauce, same bottle, same logo, is made with real cane sugar. Buy it here in the States and it's high fructose corn syrup, first ingredient, ahead of the tomatoes, ahead of anything that has to do with barbecue. Nobody changed that recipe for Canadian taste buds. They changed it for the margin, because corn syrup runs cheaper here thanks to federal subsidies. 2 tablespoons gets you close to 3 teaspoons of sugar, half your daily limit before the meats touch the grate. On the grill it runs thin, slides right off into the flame, and what sticks dries brittle before the inside's done. This one's owned by Kraft Heinz, and that name's about to come up again. Speaking of which, Heinz Original is the one whose own parent company admitted in a federal filing to the United States government that decisions like these cost them $15 billion in value. Write that number down, you'll hear it again. Open the jar and you taste the decision for yourself. A ketchup base wearing a barbecue costume, sugar and liquid smoke standing in for anything that took real time. Sets into a hard shell fast, sealing the outside before the interior's cooked through. Warren Buffett himself said on television they overpaid for Kraft. When your own investors are apologizing on the evening news, that tells you plenty about what's really in the jar. Then there's Kraft Original Slow Simmered, and this one takes some nerve. Back in 2015, Kraft made a public promise. Take the corn syrup out, clean up the formula. Got a nice write-up in the papers for it. Then, quiet as you please, with no announcement, the old formula crept right back in. Go look at the current listing. High fructose corn syrup, first ingredient. That old press release is still sitting online this very minute, right next to the current label, telling two different stories in the same browser tab. Somebody was betting you'd never scroll far enough to catch both at once. Now here's the one that surprised me most. Jack Daniel's Original No. 7. This one sits $1 or $2 above everything else, and folks pay that gap willingly because the label does a lot of work before you ever twist the cap. Tennessee heritage, a real distillery, a pitmaster who supposedly knows his business. Is there whiskey in it? Technically, yes, but it shows up dead last on the ingredient panel after sugar, water, vinegar, tomato paste, and molasses. Whatever alcohol survives standard food processing wouldn't fill a thimble. And here's the part nowhere on that bottle. This sauce has never been made in Lynchburg, Tennessee, never produced anywhere near an actual distillery. It comes out of a factory in Ohio, doing its best impression of a Tennessee smokehouse. You're not tasting whiskey, you're tasting a font and a label color. Then you've got Open Pit Original, the affordable one. 80 years on the shelf on one quiet promise. Cheap doesn't have to mean you compromised. Well, here's where that promise runs out. They had to add caramel coloring just so the sauce would look like barbecue sauce in the first place. Pour it out and it spreads thin, almost like tinted water. On a hot grate, it runs straight off the meat into the flame. Flare-ups, not flavor. High fructose corn syrup up front, hickory flavoring standing in for real smoke, modified food starch holding the whole thing together because nothing in that bottle ever came from actual cooking. It's not really a recipe. It's a correction list. 3 additives, each covering for what the others can't provide. And that brings us to the worst offender of all, the one that stings the most because it started out honest. Sweet Baby Ray's. In 1985, 2 brothers, Dave and Larry Raymond, built this sauce in a Chicago basement and entered it against 700 competitors at a real cook-off, took second place. They didn't buy that credibility. They earned it fair and square. The sauce was real. The story was real. Then, in 2005, they sold the whole thing to a Massachusetts salad dressing company for $30 million. And here's the detail that stings worst of all. Dave Raymond kept the rights to his own nickname and walked away with nothing else. The real Sweet Baby Ray runs a barbecue restaurant outside Chicago today that has no connection whatsoever to the bottle on your grocery shelf. Read today's ingredient panel. High fructose corn syrup first, then corn syrup again under a different name a few lines down, then pineapple juice concentrate, then molasses, then sugar. 5 separate ways of writing the same word on one label. A realistic pour on a rack of ribs, 4 tablespoons, not that 2 teaspoon serving size printed on the bottle, runs you about 32 grams of added sugar. Pretty much a whole day's recommended limit gone before the coleslaw ever hits the table. And still, this bottle outsells the next 7 competitors on this list combined. That's not flavor keeping it on top of that shelf. That's habit and a logo doing the remembering for a recipe that isn't there anymore. Now let's talk about the ones that got it right. The 5 that looked at the same shelf, the same cost pressures, and made a different choice. Start with G. Hughes Sugar Free, built by a caterer out of a small town in Ohio For clients managing their blood sugar who couldn't find a single bottled sauce on the shelf that wouldn't blow through their whole day's numbers before the meal was even half over. Real vine-ripened tomatoes, real apple cider vinegar, hickory smoke listed as an actual ingredient instead of a flavouring, sucralose in place of corn syrup. The FDA approved sucralose back in 1999, and it doesn't move your blood sugar the way regular sugar does. That shouldn't be a remarkable sentence for a bottle of barbecue sauce, but in this aisle, it somehow still is. No sugar in the bottle means nothing to scorch, so you can brush it on early and work with it all through the cook instead of babysitting it. Next up, Primal Kitchen Classic. Read this ingredient panel out loud and listen for anything that wouldn't belong in a real kitchen. Balsamic vinegar, apple cider vinegar, organic mustard seed, chipotle powder, date paste, fig solids. Every single word is a food word. Caramelizes slow and even on the grate, builds real bark instead of a scorched candy shell. One thing worth knowing before you commit to this one, it's now owned by Kraft Heinz too, the same company behind 3 brands on our avoid list today, the same company that wrote off $15 billion. So far, the organic and Whole30 certifications have kept the formula honest, because changing it would cost them those labels and the premium price that comes with them. But keep an eye on that panel just the same. Then there's Stubbs Original. C.B. Stubblefield fed musicians and travelers out of his place in Lubbock, Texas back in the 1960s, charged folks what they could afford, and started bottling his sauce first in mason jars, then old whiskey bottles, before it ever hit a grocery shelf in 1992. He passed away in 1995 and never lived to see the national brand that followed him. McCormick bought the company in 2015 for around $100 million and, credit where it's due, left the working recipe alone. And for a big corporation buying up a brand, that kind of restraint doesn't always happen. Tomato puree, cane sugar, distilled vinegar, molasses, real spices. No corn syrup, no modified starch, no caramel color anywhere on that panel. Runs thin on the spoon because it's honest. Nothing padding it out to fake a body it hasn't earned. Close to the top, Lily's Q Carolina. A father and son team out of South Carolina, Charlie McKenna and his dad, entered the toughest barbecue competition in North America back in 2007 against 200 competitors and took first place with a family recipe. 9 years later, in 2016, against 235 teams from 22 states and 5 different countries, they entered that same grandmother's recipe again, and won again. Brands with national distribution and 8-figure marketing budgets couldn't buy a result like that. No high fructose corn syrup, no modified starch, no synthetic preservatives anywhere in that bottle. Vinegar's the real backbone here, so it works its way down into the meat instead of just sitting on top forming a shell. And the one that earned the very top spot on this whole shelf, bone-sucking sauce. A real estate appraiser out of Raleigh, North Carolina, rebuilt his mother's Western Carolina barbecue recipe entirely from memory and launched it under that name back in 1992. 33 years later, his family still owns every single bottle that leaves that building. Never sold, never handed off to some acquisition team looking to cut costs. Tomato paste, apple cider vinegar, honey, molasses, real yellow mustard, real horseradish, dried onion, paprika, dried garlic. Every single word on that panel is something your own grandmother would recognize on sight. Honey and molasses caramelize even and slow on the grill. No scorched shell over an undercooked center. None of that failure pattern we saw all through the avoid list. So there it is. Put bone-sucking sauce right next to Sweet Baby Ray's on your counter, and you're looking at the whole story of this aisle in 2 bottles. One family recipe that was never once handed to an accountant, and one logo still cashing in on the memory of a Chicago basement that closed its books 20 years ago. If Stubbs is sitting on the shelf at your regular grocery store for $3 or $4, that's the easiest, cheapest upgrade you'll make all summer. No special trip required. And if somebody in your household is watching their blood sugar, G. Hughes won't work against that conversation at your table. Every single one of these companies is betting on the exact same thing, that you'll grab the familiar bottle, catch a hint of smoke through the plastic, and never once think to flip it over and read what's actually written on the back. Flip it over. That's the whole job around here, and it always has been. Now get on out there, fire up that grill, and put something honest on it.